All right, here we are at our last video presentation. Let's get started. We're looking at gender and resiliency, identifying strategies to increase resiliency in military-connected adolescents. I'm your presenter, Storm Schoonover. Starting off, we're looking at these two memes that help to show why resiliency is so important, especially for the military family. As of 2012, Garnold, Arnold, and Nunnery reported that there were 1.2 million children with one or both parents employed on active duty service in the military. This population of students moves an average of 6 to 9 times between kindergarten and graduation. While being a military dependent is linked to increased risks in emotional and behavior problems, most military children have a high rate of emotional resiliency. Increased resiliency helps military children to adapt during times of high stress, particularly deployment and frequent transitions. Starting off our literature review, we're going to look at our first stressor, which is deployment. Military affiliation for children increases the probability of mental health problems, especially depression and anxiety. The dramatic increase in mental health visits implies that military deployments, which began in 2001, have a significant impact on military youth. The length of deployment also has direct consequences for youth. Children whose parents were deployed more than 11 months have the highest level of mental health diagnoses. Children are at a higher risk of neglect from the caregiving parent during deployment, and the combination of lengthy deployments and increased likelihood of parental neglect directly impacts the mental health of military youth. Military children with a deployed parent are twice as likely to use illegal or prescription drugs as similar non-military children. This population is also more likely to consume alcohol and should be considered at risk for alcohol and drug abuse, especially during times of high familial stress. Sexual activity and gang affiliation have also been known to increase. Relationship conflict between parent and child also has a direct effect on child resiliency and can lead to decreased academic achievement. Our second stressor is frequent transitions. Military children on average attend 5 different school districts before graduation. However, Johnson and Ling determined that frequent school changes actually enhance resiliency for this population. Additionally, communities with a strong military culture ease the transition for many military youth. Military children are more likely to experience educational gaps because of the frequent transitions. However, it's also important to note that resiliency is not static and that it can decrease with an increase in stressors like transitioning. Research has found that military children, though faced with additional stressors, are more resilient than their non-military peers. This is attributed to many factors. Often military-connected youth have previous exposure to different cultures and environments and are more likely to adapt to their new environment following a military transfer. Children are more resilient during times of stress and transition when supported by a military community and others in military life. Community support and positive military perception also increase resiliency from military family members. The military lifestyle impacts student academic resiliency. Bulgarine and Horvath found that children whose parents have been deployed 19 months or longer since 2001 have lower achievement test scores compared to those that have experienced less or no parental deployment. Educational support can increase resiliency, however. The Compact on Educational Opportunities for Military Children encourages more streamlined process for credit placements, record transfers, etc. for military children to enhance academic success and on-time graduation rate. Schools that focus on supporting military children and sharing best practices also encourage resilient military adolescents. Although research on gender and resiliency is minimal, evidence suggests that the connection is apparent in outdoor adventure programs and can perhaps provide insight regarding military children. Overholt and Ewart found that women experience risk differently than men, and that men who shared emotions and communicated effectively were shown to have higher resiliency. Milburn and Lightfoot identify additional gender differences in school. School staff reported that boys exhibit anger and aggression, while girls had somatic complaints and seemed depressed during parental deployment. Which leads us to our research gap. With regards to these findings, research on gender-specific resiliency in military-connected adolescents is needed to understand what interventions can increase emotional and academic well-being. Research has previously looked at resiliency in military families. Gender-based analysis has not been completed. Researchers have not identified gender-specific methods for increasing resiliency among military-connected adolescents, and Milbert and Lightfoot further identify a need for adolescent-specific research. While Williams and Bryan identified certain home factors and school factors that improve academic resiliency among urban African-American male adolescents, there is a gap in information concerning resiliency factors for military adolescents. Our 4 guiding research questions for this study are: how does student relationship to caregiver affect resiliency for military adolescent males and females? How do contextual factors affect resiliency for this population? How does adolescent age and gender influence level of resiliency for this population? And how does gender and age influence strategy use to improve resiliency for military-connected youth when exposed to military-related stressors? This is a mixed method study. The goal is to understand how gender, age of military-connected adolescents influence resiliency and strategy use when dealing with military-related stressors like deployment and frequent transitions. The participants have been limited to students enrolled in domestic dependent elementary and secondary schools in grades 6 through 12. Fort Campbell, Kentucky School District was identified as a school that fit this requirement with a enrollment of 1,780 students in grades 6 through 12. This mixed method embedded study will have 2 phases. Phase 1 is a resiliency survey, and phase 2 is a focus group interview. For phase 1, the students will be identified through stratified sampling. To determine the sample, students will be divided into gender groups by age, by grade level. 32 males and 32 females will participate per grade level for a total of 224 female students and 224 male students, for a total of 28% of the population, to get a proportional random sample of military adolescent female and male students. Stratified random sampling data collection will occur in order to get a precise, clear sample that illustrates the levels of resiliency for military-connected adolescent males compared to military-connected adolescent females. The second phase of the study will begin after students have been given the initial survey on resiliency to target focus group participants. Sample will be determined using purposive sampling. Based on survey results, highly resilient male and female students will be identifiable. There will be 4 focus groups created, divided by gender, and then split into grades 6 through 8 and 9 through 12. Questions will focus on catalyst questions, as well as military stressor-related questions that our researcher developed. For our instrumentation, I'll be using Child and Youth Resilient Measure 28, created by the Resilience Research Center. It uses a 28-question, 5-point Likert scaled survey divided into 3 subgroups: individual traits, relationship to caregiver, and contextual factors. The CYRM-28 was assessed for validity using Cronbach's alpha paired sample t-test and interclass correlational coefficients. It'll take approximately 20 minutes to complete. Phase 2 instrumentation, participants will be selected using high mean scores on all 3 subgroups of phase 1. They will each focus group will be asked the same questions, and those answers will be transcribed for later analysis. It will occur in a neutral school environment. We'll be using the Resiliency Research Center catalyst questions included in the CYRM-28, as well as military stressor-specific questions that a researcher developed. This is what the CYRM-28 looks like, or this is a sample. And then the phase 2 interview questions that a researcher created include: how does moving with the military affect you personally and academically? What strategies do you use to make moving easier? What advice do you give a peer new to the military lifestyle? Have you had a parent deploy? How does your parent's deployment affect you personally? How does your life change when your parent deploys? What things do you do while your parent is deployed that help you with these changes? And what does it mean to you to be a military dependent? For data analysis, for phase 1, the standard deviation of each subgroup will be assessed. ANOVA test for variance will then occur, looking at our independent variables of individual traits, relationship to caregiver, and contextual factors, while our dependent variables are going to be age and gender. For phase 2 analysis, interview responses will be recorded and transcribed. The researcher will use qualitative content analysis to analyze and transcribe interviews. The researcher will read the transcript, organize the information into categories, and then from these categories, patterns and themes will be identified and described in order to identify gender-specific factors and skills used by military-connected adolescents to support high resiliency. The researcher will specifically analyze the data, looking for coping strategies, strengths, and involvement in extracurricular activities specific to gender and adolescent age. The researcher will use member checking to validate results and limit researcher bias. Focus group participants will be able to evaluate the research or transcript prior to analysis. The participants will be asked to find a transcript attesting to accuracy of reporting. This ensures that the researcher does not inadvertently bias the data. Looking at this data analysis, the researchers should be able to answer the research questions. In phase 1, the questions, how does student relationship to caregiver affect resiliency for the population, will be answered, as well as how do contextual factors affect resiliency, and how does adolescent age and gender influence level of resiliency for the identified population. For phase 2, the data should be able to answer how does gender and age influence strategies to improve resiliency for military-connected youth when exposed to military-related stressors like deployment and frequent transitions, which leads us to the references page. This has been a great semester. I've learned a lot, and I really appreciate it. Have a great summer.